I've always been a city guy, born and raised in the bustling heart of Oslo. So when my girlfriend Anna suggested we spend Christmas in a quaint village in Norway, I was intrigued by the prospect of a serene holiday away from the city's relentless pace. The village, nestled in a picturesque valley surrounded by snow-capped mountains, was like a scene from a Christmas card. We rented a small cabin on the outskirts, cozy with a charming rustic charm. That first evening, we decided to visit the local pub, eager to soak in the village's festive spirit. The pub was a warm, welcoming place, filled with the sound of laughter and the clinking of glasses. We found ourselves in conversation with a group of locals who shared stories about the village and its traditions. As the night wore on, the conversation took a darker turn. One of the villagers, an old man with deep-set eyes, began to tell us about a local legend. The old man leaned in, the flickering light of the pub's hearth casting shadows across his weathered face. "You see," he began, his voice a gravelly whisper, "it's been happening for as long as anyone in the village can remember. Every Christmas, without fail, someone vanishes, just disappears into the night, no trace left behind." I exchanged a skeptical look with Anna, but the old man's eyes held a solemn intensity that kept us listening. "It always happens on the night of Christmas Eve. The village has tried everything to prevent it, staying indoors, setting up watches, even calling in authorities from outside. But nothing's ever worked. By morning, someone is always missing." He took a slow sip of his drink, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "Some say it's a curse, one that dates back to a terrible event long ago, when the village wronged a traveler passing through on Christmas. They say he laid a curse upon the village's retribution." Anna, ever the pragmatic one, frowned. "But surely there must be some explanation. People don't just vanish into thin air." The old man nodded, a knowing look in his eye. "That's what we all want to believe. But the disappearances, they're unlike anything you'd expect. No signs of struggle, no footprints in the snow, nothing. It's as if the earth just swallows them whole." He leaned back, his gaze drifting to the flames. "There are those who whisper of darker things, of old spirits and ancient beings that roam the land on winter nights. They say these spirits are drawn to our village, that they claim a soul each Christmas as payment for a debt long forgotten." The room had grown quiet, the other patrons listening in. The old man's voice dropped to a near whisper, and every year, as Christmas approaches, a sense of dread settles over the village. We all wonder, who will be next? Will it be a friend, a neighbor, a loved one, or perhaps a stranger? He looked directly at us, his gaze unsettlingly intense. "So take care, my friends. The nights here hold more than just cold and darkness. They hold secrets, secrets that are best left undisturbed." We left the pub later that night, the old man's story lingering in my mind. The walk back to our cabin was quiet, the only sound our footsteps crunching in the freshly fallen snow. Back at the cabin, we settled in for the night, the warmth of the fireplace a welcome contrast to the cold outside. But as we prepared for bed, a strange sound interrupted the silence, a soft, almost imperceptible whisper, like the rustling of leaves. We looked at each other, puzzled. "Probably just the wind," I said, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. But the sound persisted, growing louder, more insistent. It was coming from outside near the back of the cabin. Anna clung to me, her eyes wide with fear. I peered out the window, but the night was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, and then the power went out, plunging us into darkness. "Stay here," I whispered to Anna, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'll go check the fuse box." I fumbled for a flashlight and made my way to the back door. The sound continued, a strange rhythmic rustling that seemed to be moving around the cabin. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a slap. I shone the flashlight around but saw nothing amiss. The snow around the cabin was undisturbed, a pristine white blanket. I was about to head back inside when I heard it, a low, guttural growl coming from the edge of the woods. I froze, the beam of my flashlight trembling in my hand. The growl grew louder, closer. I could now make out a shape moving in the darkness, large and hulking, its eyes reflecting the light of my flashlight. Panic seized me. I turned and ran back to the cabin, slamming the door behind me. Anna was waiting, her face pale with fear. "There's something out there," I gasped, locking the door. We huddled together in the darkness, listening as the sounds continued outside, the growling, the rustling, now joined by a faint eerie whispering. It was as if the night itself was alive, watching us, waiting. Our phones were useless. No signal in this remote corner of the world. We were cut off, alone with whatever was lurking outside. Hours passed, the sounds outside never ceasing. We sat in silence, too afraid to speak, too afraid to move. The night seemed endless, a dark, suffocating void. As dawn broke, the sounds gradually faded. We ventured outside, the morning light a stark contrast to the terrors of the night. The snow around the cabin was now marred with tracks, large, indistinct prints that led back into the woods. We packed our things in a hurry, eager to leave the cabin and its nightmarish memories behind. The drive back to Oslo was quiet, both of us lost in our thoughts, the horror of the night still clinging to us. The village's legend had seemed like a quaint tale, a bit of local folklore. But now, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped becoming part of it. The disappearances, the old man's story, the thing in the woods, they were all connected, pieces of a puzzle we were lucky to leave unsolved. I never returned to that village, nor did I ever want to. The memory of that Christmas, of the fear and the unknown that lurked in the darkness, stayed with me. It was a reminder that some legends are rooted in truth, and some places hold secrets that are best left undiscovered. I hear a lot of scary shopping stories, and they're usually from the perspective of the person who is shopping. However, my scariest experience happened when I was working at a bookstore. About 2 months after I was promoted from bookseller to assistant manager, we were hit by the Christmas rush. It was always so overwhelming, really. By the end of the night, everyone was so wiped out. And getting all the receipts and drawers counted at the end of the night took so much time. On the nights that I was closing, I let the workers go as soon as they were done. There was no reason to make them stick around and be tired while I was finishing up my work. After I let everyone go, I went back in the office to do my work. After a while, I heard the doorbell ring. We had security cameras, but there wasn't one at the door, so I had to go to the front door and see who it was. There was a guy there, and he was dressed in dark clothes and had his hood up. I asked him how I could help him, of course watching him through the door. "Hey dude, I left my wallet in your store," he told me. "Can you open the door and let me come in and get it?" I asked him where he thought he left it and that I would look for it for him. He didn't like that idea and told me he wasn't sure. He had been shopping through the entire store and would have to look for it. I asked him if he had bought anything, and he told me yes, which meant he had to have his wallet on him at that point. I pointed that out to him, and he seemed taken back a bit. I told him we didn't get anything turned in, but I could take his information and get back to him if we find anything. The man began getting angry, telling me that he needed his wallet tonight, and he couldn't wait for me to look for it. He kept insisting that I let him in so he could look for it. When I told him that there was no way I was letting him in the store this late, and while I was alone, he began getting visibly angry. He told me that if I didn't let him in the place right away, he would call the police and tell them that I stole his wallet. He even got his cell phone out of his pocket and acted like he was going to call. At that point, I had enough. I told the guy the best I could do for him is take his information and call him if anything was found. I then told him that if this wasn't good enough, then there wasn't anything at all that I could do for him. He got really angry and began swearing at me. He grabbed the door and began shaking it, demanding that I open the door. I told him I was going to walk over to the customer service desk and call the police. I wasn't willing to cooperate anymore. As I made my way over there, I noticed the guy take off down the street. I thought that was the end of him, and I figured that I didn't really need to bother the police for this. I went back to my work and tried my best to get it done so I could go home and get some rest. It took me about 2 hours to honestly finish all of my work. I hadn't heard the doorbell ring and pretty much figured that I wouldn't be seeing that guy again. However, when I was going to the front of the store, I did look around to see if anyone was in the parking lot before I went outside. I went out to my car in the cold and couldn't wait to get out of the cold. However, I froze when I was maybe within a couple feet away from my car. There was someone in the back seat of my car. He was hiding, down in the back seat with his hood over his head, but there was definitely someone in the back seat of my car, and I knew exactly who it had to be. Furthermore, he must have seen me or he wouldn't have ducked down. I did the only thing I could think of to do. I turned and ran at full speed back to the store. I didn't look back around until I had made it to the door. And yeah, he was coming at me. I unlocked the door and shut it behind me. He made it to the door right before I could lock it, so I had to do my best to hold it closed while trying to turn the lock. As I did, the man screamed all sorts of obscenities at me, telling me he was going to kill me. As the door opened outward, I quickly pushed it toward him, knocking him on the ground. Before he could realize what had happened and recover, I was able to get the door closed and locked. I immediately called the police. The guy left after the door was locked, but the police picked him up pretty quickly. I've always loved Christmas, the time of year when magic seems real and the world sparkles with joy and light. So when an unexpected, elegantly wrapped gift appeared on our doorstep on Christmas Eve, it felt like a delightful addition to our festive celebrations. Little did I know, it would turn our holiday into a nightmare. I live in a quaint old house on the outskirts of town with my husband, Tom, and our 2 children, Lily and Alex. We have a tradition of exchanging gifts on Christmas Eve, so when we found the package, beautifully wrapped in gold and red paper with a perfect bow, we were intrigued but assumed it was from a friend who had dropped by while we were out. The card attached to the gift had no name, just a simple Merry Christmas to a wonderful family. We placed it under the tree with the other presents, thinking little more of it. That evening, as we gathered around the tree, the children's excitement was palpable. They eagerly unwrapped their gifts, laughter and joy filling the room. I reached for the mysterious package, curious to see what it held. Inside was a doll, an antique porcelain doll with delicate features and intricately styled hair. Its dress was a faded blue and it wore a tiny lace bonnet. But it was the eyes that caught my attention. They were incredibly lifelike, a deep, piercing blue that seemed to follow you around the room. "Creepy," Tom muttered, but Lily was fascinated. She took the doll and placed it on the mantelpiece, declaring that it was too special to play with. That night, after the kids were in bed, Tom and I settled in the living room, the only light coming from the flickering flames in the fireplace. I glanced at the doll on the mantelpiece. In the dim light, its gaze seemed unsettling, almost accusatory. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. I would find the doll in different places from where we left it. One morning, it was on the dining table. Another day, I found it sitting on the windowsill in the hallway. "It must be the kids moving it," Tom said when I mentioned it. But when I asked them both, Lily and Alex denied touching the doll. Then the noises started, soft, almost imperceptible at first. The sound of something scratching, a faint whispering like a hushed conversation. Every time I went to check, the noise would stop, and nothing would be out of place except, sometimes, the doll. It would be turned in a different direction or have its hands positioned differently. I tried to convince myself it was all in my head, but the feeling of being watched grew stronger every day. The house, once a haven of warmth and security, now felt oppressive, as if charged with an unseen presence. One night, the tension reached a breaking point. I awoke to a sound downstairs, a soft thud like something falling. Heart pounding, I nudged Tom awake, and we both crept downstairs. The living room was dark, the embers in the fireplace long since died, and there in the middle of the room was the doll. It was standing upright, its head tilted, those piercing blue eyes staring right at us. I gasped, stumbling backward, my mind reeling. This isn't possible," I stammered. Tom was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We're getting rid of it," he said, his voice trembling. He picked up the doll and locked it in the trunk in the attic, his movements hurried, almost frantic. But even with the doll out of sight, the feeling of unease remained. The whispers seemed louder now, more insistent. Sleep became elusive, and the children grew restless and anxious. 2 days later, Lily fell ill. It was sudden, a fever that came out of nowhere and left her weak and bedridden. The doctors couldn't explain it. They said it was just a virus and would pass. That night, as I sat by her bedside, a cold dread settled over me. The whispers were louder than ever, and I knew deep down that the doll was behind it. It was as if it had cast a shadow over our home, a malevolent force that we had unwittingly welcomed. In desperation, I went to the attic. I had to get rid of the doll, once and for all. The trunk was where Tom had left it, but when I opened it, my heart sank. It was empty. The doll was gone. I searched the house, panic rising with each empty room, and then I heard it, a soft, childlike giggle coming from Lily's room. I burst in, and there it was, the doll, sitting on Lily's bedside table, its eyes fixed on my sick daughter. Its face, once expressionless, now bore a twisted, sinister smile. With a cry of horror, I grabbed the doll and ran outside, into the snowy night. I didn't stop until I reached the old well at the edge of our property. Without hesitation, I threw the doll in, watching as it disappeared into the darkness. The whisper stopped. The oppressive atmosphere lifted. It was as if the house had been holding its breath and was now finally able to exhale. Lily's fever broke the next morning, and life slowly returned to normal. But the memory of that Christmas, of the doll and its watchful eyes, remains with us. We never found out where the gift came from, and perhaps we never will.